Homer, I'm ruined.
I know.
You know, at times like these, I used to turn to the Bible and find solace, but even the good book can't help me now.
Why not?
I sold it to you for 7 cents.
Oh.
Hello, and welcome to the Simpsons Countdown, the podcast in which we go back to the beginning and watch all of The Simpsons to trace the creative evolution of the series and count down, finding the exact moment in which it began its downhill journey into irrelevance. I'm Erix Antoine, and this week I'm joined by Troy Anderson of AndersonVision.com. We'll be discussing When Flanders Failed, which originally aired on October 3rd, 1991. It was written by John Vitti and directed by Jim Reardon. In this episode, Homer makes a wish for Ned Flanders' new left-handed store to go out of business. The wish comes true, and the Flanders clan find themselves out of a home and living in their car. Homer naturally feels guilty, so he helps the store flourish by telling all of Springfield's left-handed citizens to patronize it, ending on a heartwarming note of camaraderie and friendship. It's a leftover from Season 2, and it shows, as it is still operating on earnest, sentimental levels despite having quite a few fun visual and verbal gags. In any case, Troy and I are about to break it down. So, without further ado, here we go.
Dad, do you know what schadenfreude is?
No, I do not know what schadenfreude is. Please tell me because I'm dying to know.
It's a German term for shameful joy, taking pleasure in the suffering of others.
Oh, come on, Lisa. I'm just glad to see him fall flat on his butt. He's usually all happy and comfortable and surrounded by loved ones, and it makes me feel... What's the opposite of that shameful joy thing of yours?
Sour grapes.
Boy, those Germans have a word for everything.
Yeah, so here we are. Welcome back, Troy. It's good to have you. Here we are at the third season.
Oh, yes. When they started turning to a ratings powerhouse, and when 25 years later, people will remember as the good old days, when honestly, those days came a little bit later.
So in your opinion, this is still not quite, we're not quite there yet.
This is the first season where they're about to have their identity. It's not when they're at their peak.
I'll follow you there. They're not at their peak, but I would say that this is the first season where you have a sort of like a consistent quality. It's like they went in with a sort of game plan, with a sort of vision. It starts to feel a little more cohesive in this season. They start to take a few more risks with the storytelling. They start to do slightly more ambitious things. And so here you have an episode. You know, it's a little inexplicable. I remember this episode from watching it back in the day as just being the one about the left-handed store, right?
Yeah.
And so revisiting it now, it has a couple of elements that are weird, that are like interesting. You know, and the first of the things that I find unusual about the episode is that Homer's a real shit.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is the first episode where he's really a shit. Because there are others where well-intentioned, you know, and he fucks up and he ends up doing things wrong or whatever. But in this one, he is malicious. Truly, truly a shit. The villain of the episode. And I like that they took that concept and rolled with it. I mean, I do like that.
I don't like Homer as a bad guy. I don't think Homer works as a bad guy because, again, when he started, it was a really lame attempt at making a Walter Matthau style dad. Then he was a prick for the first 5 years, and then eventually he's turned into the mentally disabled boomer that we all love.
He has a redemption arc in this episode, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it builds to the maudlin ending that it has and all of that. But the thing about it is that it's weird to take the protagonist or to take the character and make him so unlikable, you know, like up front. That's what I mean. It's a weird risk for the show to take, I think. The way he behaves at that barbecue, I think we all know somebody like that, right? We all have that experience. and this is still the show trying to be grounded and all of that. But since the very first episode of the series, they tried to build up this sort of rivalry between Homer and Flanders.
Yeah.
They could never really find a way to make it work properly.
Yeah.
Because it was always kind of weird because it's a rivalry, but it's kind of a one-sided rivalry because Flanders is just a nice guy. You know, he's well off.
Yeah.
But he's basically a nice guy. And Homer's just envious of him and he's a shit.
Well, a lot of the problem was that they were trying to rebel against the goody-goody, like Dad Next Door types, Bill Cosby at the time, Patrick Duffy, I'm trying to think some other types who they were rebelling against, like the Image, because, you know, they're bad, they got Fox attitude.
But basically, okay, so let's deconstruct this episode. It revolves around the idea of a left-handed store in a mall, a store that specializes in left-handed products. And it's something that we don't really think about, that it's true, right? That things are not designed for left-handed people. But here's the thing, like I guess it's true that there's a low percentage of left-handed people in the world. Like, it's not common, right, to be left-handed. It never really occurred to I remember when I watched it, it just didn't occur to me, right? Whether it's the guy with the ledger or, you know, the corkscrew, and I'm going, corkscrew? But wait a minute, what, you know, I mean, really a corkscrew needs to be left-handed? That's the part that I didn't get, because, I mean, a corkscrew.
You know, they came up with the idea, don't you?
No idea.
The year before, George Myers, one of the head writers, he had a friend who opened up a Leftorium, an actual store. I think it's in, not the LA Galleria, but it's in the mall they shot Jackie Brown in. And it went out in about 9 months, and this was early 90s. And so he was telling all the writers, like, you can't believe the stupidest idea my friend had. And they're like, we need to put that on the show. And they had to figure out who would actually have that business. And that's how they came on with Ned having it. That's
interesting. I didn't even realize that there was such a place. And so to build an entire episode around that concept, I guess it's a funny idea. Yeah. And it's them trying to flesh out Flanders a little bit. I think this is the first episode. Well, it isn't, because there was an episode in the second season where the War of the Simpsons. There's a little bit there, you know. There's also the episode, the golfing rivalry. You know, there are little bits and pieces here and there, but this is the first one that really, really focuses on him and tries to flesh him out as a character, and makes him kind of a likable character.
Well, the episodes you were talking about from season 2, this was originally supposed to be a season 2 episode.
Oh, really? Okay, so it's like
the Koreans botched animation so bad that Fox was like, we're not airing this. So they had to send it back, and they had to work in America with some CalArts students and redesign the whole episode. By the time they did it, it became a season 3 episode.
And I guess it would have fit in. It would have fit in the sort of arc that they were crafting, the rivalry arc. It would have fit in more there, I suppose. Yeah. You know, because there's, like, thematically, it would have been of a piece with those other episodes. And here it just feels a little bit out of left field. And it's like early in the season, too. It's like right at the top. And it almost feels like filler because it's following, you know, you have the huge season premiere with Michael Jackson, and then, you know, you have that the Lisa Simpson political episode, and then you have this one. Yeah. You know, it feels like just sort of a throwaway episode.
Well, in a way, it was filler, and the people who like try to go back in time and try to praise it as being like this ultimate great episode, they ignore the fact that it was a botched job from season 2 that took an extra 3 to 6 months to get fixed. And they deleted so much to get the runtime right that the whole Bart Simpson kung fu plot makes no sense.
Yes, well, that comes kind of out of nowhere. It's sort of just there. It's funny. It provides some fun gags.
Well, it's also one of the last episodes about, you know, the emotional appeal, like a very special episode, like, you know, Citizen X in town tries for his dream and loses it all. And now it's up to Homer and the fellas to come together and bring them back their business and all this shit. It's one of the last Simpsons episodes, because by the time we get to season 4, the whole old sitcom trappings where a lot of these guys got started, that stuff's gone. This is one of the last gasps of that old sitcom style still being in the show. Because by the end of this season, it's gone.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, because I wanted to focus on. This does have kind of a maudlin ending,
Yeah.
right? And whatever, I guess it works for the episode, but it's what they build to, it's what they construct to. But you're right, season 1 and season 2, you've got tons of this stuff. You've got tons of the whole smiles through tears thing. And you're right that it starts to get filtered out little by little, where at least they get it to a point where you'll have bits and pieces of it, but it'll be more organic, or it'll just be more like interspersed throughout the episodes. We'll see in this season, they do get occasionally sentimental, like in the Krusty episode with his dad, or there's even there's obviously some sweet moments in the Michael Jackson episode. There are sweet moments interspersed in the flashback episode. There's some sweetness there, but I think they get to a place where it starts to feel more organic, and they really focus more on making the gags land, on keeping it a funny show and avoiding the whole maudlin sentimentality that tended to bog down a lot of the episodes in the first 2 seasons.
So much of The Simpsons depends on the writer. And John Vitti, the guy who wrote this, he's not one of my favorite writers for The Simpsons, but I think he did stronger work on King of the Hill. But that's because he's one of those guys who almost depends on that sitcom format.
When you say that, you mean the whole formula, right?
The whole formula. The
structure of a traditional sitcom.
Oh, he needs it bad. He was one of the big 11 writers in those first 3 seasons, and then by Mr. Plow, he was getting, pushed over to producing and other roles and everything. He'd end up on The Critic, Larry Sanders Show, King of the Hill. He even wrote a few Office episodes. In terms of the 11 writers that were in that main first season, he's probably number 10.
In the first 3 years of The Simpsons, you essentially had the same team of writers, and they got basically overhauled by season 4, right? So that's why the process took this long, I guess, for it to really hit its peak the way you're suggesting.
Yeah, because when they start bringing in, I'm trying to think who you really can pin on it. But I mean, you got people like John Swartzwelder, who's always been the constant. I think John Swartzwelder is still writing episodes. He's always doing something.
So he's never totally left.
Well, that's part of the reason why a lot of people think he's not real. And that's a whole other argument.
Okay, well now you got to tell me about that, because I didn't know anything about people thinking that John Swartzwelder is not a real person.
Well, John Swartzwelder, it's been kind of well known for a while that he won't do. There's one picture of him from the early 80s in a writing group. He will go out of his way not to be recorded or seen on camera, on film. He even faked. He had a friend fake for him because they were going to force him, because Matt Groening wanted to get him on one of the commentaries. So he tricked Matt Groening into trying to get him on a thing, and he goes, "Hi, I'm John's friend,
So he didn't participate in any of the commentaries in the first.
No.
Yeah, I didn't know that. that's news to me. But you don't buy that, right? I mean, he is a real guy. He's just reclusive.
I know he's real because the theory for the longest time, early Simpsons fan stuff, was that he was just an assumed name. There was only 10 writers, and when they all had to share a script, but they didn't want to share credit, they just credited him, which was bullshit because, I mean, he worked on Saturday Night Live. He worked on The Simpsons forever. He even wrote the lyrics to Spider Pig for the Simpsons movie. He actually stopped writing full episodes in whatever season year. Let me see. He stopped writing full episodes in 2003. Still consults.
Okay, so he'll contribute to scripts, but there hasn't been a full John Swartzwelder script. But this episode was written by John Vitti, right?
Yeah.
Who's as you said, he's number 10 out of the 11 writers. And look, I don't think it's a bad episode at all, and I don't think it's badly written. I do think it's essentially, I mean, it has funny gags. It has its moments. I think it's trying to flesh out the character of Ned Flanders, and it does it in a way that's, I mean, it makes him sympathetic, but I guess that the whole plot is built around a rather ridiculous concept.
Well, the whole problem was that they were trying to make a foil. They wanted a foil, but when you start realizing maybe Ned's not the worst guy, then you kind of get all shaky, how do we do this?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. That's what I was saying before, where they present him, because when he first appears in the Christmas episode, very minor character. It's just he's putting up the lights and, ostentatious, and he's just got one line and whatever. So you could go anywhere with that character at that point because, he puts up the lights. He's obviously more prosperous than Homer, the whole contrast thing. And then a few episodes later, there's the whole camping thing where he shows up with the big, the huge motorhome and again, very ostentatious. But anytime they actually focus on the character, they made him nice, And if they'd made him obnoxious, then you have a foil. Then you have somebody that, he's successful, but he's like the guy you love to hate or whatever. Or then he's an appropriate foil. But I think when they decided to make the character, as you said, a sort of parody of, or sort of take on like Patrick Duffy or Bill Cosby or whatever, when they just made him, he's just a nice guy. He's the clean-cut, nice guy. And this is early, because then eventually they found ways to use Ned Flanders appropriately and in a very funny way, take advantage of a lot of the quirks, and they start going into the whole religious thing. And so that was something that they could really, really play on and come up with some really funny ideas.
Yeah.
Keeping him a nice guy, but, there's this stuff under there that you can really exploit for comedy.
Like, I'm trying to think who wrote Hurricane Nettie, the hurricane episode, Steve Young. That was a season 8 episode. That was the first time I thought they really understood him, because showing his parents as, beatniks, hippies, and everything. I mean, him as a little kid, you got the idea why he became the way he is, because he's rebelling by being the most straight-laced person possible.
Right. Yeah, there's a little bit of that there. I mean, it's the whole concept of if the parents are bohemian, then you will rebel against them by becoming a straight arrow, right?
Yeah.
And they're sort of playing a little bit on the whole. I mean, that like in Family Ties, that was the whole concept, right? That the children of boomers were going to be yuppies. Alex P. Keaton is a hardcore Republican, and his parents are hippies, right? Who protested the Vietnam War and all that stuff. And so, they were, flower children or whatever. And that concept, I mean, I guess it's a little bit of a cliche, or it's a bit of a forced concept. But I don't know, like, what do you think of that concept? Of like the idea, the central idea of Family Ties, which plays a little bit into the whole Ned Flanders thing in a way.
It's kind of dumb, but at the same time, like, I don't even think, like, you can't even use Alex P. Keaton mold for Ned, because Ned is repressed. This episode shows that he's spent 20 plus years as a pharmaceutical sales rep. Because you also got to remember, he's an elderly, I wouldn't say elderly, but much older than Homer and Marge.
Wait a minute. So let me stop you there for a minute. I never thought about that. Is that I assumed he was about the same age as well, actually, no, it wouldn't make sense, right? Because then, if his parents are beatniks, then that means that he would have been a kid in the 50s.
Yeah.
Because Homer and Marge are in their mid-30s.
Yeah.
The standard, mid-30s. In season 1, in the episode about, Marge's birthday, she's turning 34.
34, that's right.
Yeah, she's 34, and Homer's just a year older, so Homer's like 35. Yeah. I know they're going to eventually retcon it so that, I mean, I haven't gotten to these episodes yet, and we're years away, but I know they eventually retcon it so that Homer's actually a kid in the 90s, I guess, or in the 80s. I mean,
he's a college student, teenager in the 90s.
Right, a teenager in the 90s. But yeah, because, I mean, they have to keep it consistent. If Homer's younger than I am now, right? So, and I was a teenager in the 90s, so there's certain things that they can't reconcile, right? Because at this point, if you were going to keep the whole thing, and if you were going to keep that Skinner's a war veteran, at this point he wouldn't be a Vietnam vet anymore. I mean, It just wouldn't. There's no way. It just doesn't make sense anymore.
Well, that's what Marvel Comics runs into trouble with the Punisher, because Vietnam is such a big part of the character. They still have him as a Vietnam vet while they've aged down everyone else.
Well, that's okay. So that's interesting, because I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. I mean, it's a huge part in the Punisher comics. Are there new ones? Are they still publishing them? Like, are they making new ones?
Every once in a while, they'll start a new run, and then it doesn't sell enough. So they usually get to about 12 issues or more.
And they've never retconned it, because in the Netflix show of the Punisher, Okay, because there they did. I mean, he's what is it, the Gulf War? I don't remember anymore. It's like it's the Gulf War, right? Or something, right? Or War in Afghanistan or whatever. He's a veteran of that, but he's not a Vietnam vet, right?
Yeah, they have
Obviously.
not.
So
Garth Ennis refused to say he was anything but a Vietnam vet.
I guess the only thing you can do is turn it into a period piece, I guess.
Yeah, you almost
And
have to.
yeah, you don't have a choice. But with the Simpsons, they never really have. They've always sort of they've allowed the show to continue commenting on culture, and they've allowed the show to sort of you know become appropriate to its era, and the characters have to adjust to that new era, and it's a tricky thing to do. And I think that but little details like, I mean, if you're telling me that there's still that even now, Ned Flanders' parents are still beatniks,
Yeah.
and Skinner's a Vietnam vet, and I was like, I wonder how that works, because if that were true, I mean, Skinner would have to be
Older than Chalmers.
yeah, exactly. He'd be what in his 70s at this point. But your comment about Ned Flanders being it had not occurred to me though that he's older than Homer and Marge, but you're right. He's at least a little older than them. Yeah. All right. So back to this episode. So the kung fu teacher is not George Takei.
No, it's Hank Azaria.
It's Hank Azaria doing basically a George Takei riff.
Yeah.
Because the first time that character appeared, the character of Akira, who was the waiter in the Blowfish episode.
Yeah.
And that time it was George Takei, but then eventually they, maybe they couldn't get him back or something, and so they just have Hank Azaria imitate George Takei. Why do you think they insert this subplot about the karate school?
As far as I know, because I'm an animation nerd, when the episode was delivered first and was botched for season 2, this was the part of the episode that suffered the most. So they literally trimmed around what they couldn't correct in post, and then they just left it because they're like, it hit running time. It makes sense. Not saying it was good, it just
right. I mean, I think it's just because the Simpsons has the complex structure of having like the A story and the B story, which is not something that's very common in sitcoms. At least formulaic sitcoms that at least of the period were a lot more straightforward, where you just had sort of one central plot and that was it. The Simpsons is a comedy series that the innovation, I guess, of the time was it had more complex plotting, so you could have multiple storylines going on in an episode, which is usually the purview of like an hour-long drama or something, right? Where you have like the A story, the B story, and whatever. And that's how The Simpsons usually operated. And they tended to do it in different ways. And the way that it usually worked in The Simpsons is by having like certain things happen in Act 1. It's almost like its own self-contained little story that sets up the rest of the episode, right?
Yeah.
Which I always thought was interesting that they did that, because that's not something that was common for sitcoms at the time to do that.
No.
Right? And even for storytelling, like in general, you normally in your first act you set up your story, but here it's like the first act can be its own little story, and then you launch into something else, right? Entirely, and that's always been an interesting feature of The Simpsons, I think, and that makes the episodes feel more sprawling and more ambitious than your average sitcom episode. But here they kind of throw in this subplot of Bart going to karate school, which has nothing to do with anything. It's just kind of there. It's an excuse for them, I guess, because they've got the marquee character, they've got the Bart character, and they need to use him somehow. I think here they were still sort of juggling the whole concept of, is this the Bart Simpson show? Is this the Homer Simpson show? Like, what is this? They still hadn't decided exactly what it was, right? I mean, I think here they were still sort of juggling with the concept of it being the Bart Simpson show, and occasionally they'll have some episodes that focus on Homer, but it's still the Bart Simpson show. And I think that transformation began to happen in this season, where like it really starts to become the Homer Simpson show.
Yeah, and a lot of that's because they want to have adult plots and they want to have kid plots, and they don't really know how to balance it out because the audience at the time was still majority youth.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it was not a show aimed at kids, but kids were still primarily the ones who were watching.
I mean, I was the target audience at the time, and I watched more of this and Married Children than anything else on there.
Yeah, I mean it's family viewing because I mean when I watched this, by the time the third season came around, yeah, it would be the family thing. Of course I'd be sitting down like with my dad and whatever to watch it on Thursday night. It was normal family viewing, you know. But it was, although its target audience it was a family show, but it was sort of trying to skew towards adults with its humor. But they knew that they had a huge audience of kids, and Bart was supposed to be the character that appealed to them, and so they always need to exploit him somehow. That's why he like shows up in all the video games and all the other stuff, you know. So it took them a while to realize that they could just make it the Homer Simpson show, and it would work, and nobody would care. And in fact, people would prefer it that way. But yeah, it is the sort of tug of war that they played on with the Simpsons, where they're still trying to figure it out, right? So you have to have the Bart plot, you have to have the Homer plot, all that, and so to try to make it work. And so, yeah, I guess that makes it feel kind of lopsided. But it is kind of interesting. Now going back to the whole left-handed store thing, how many people in Springfield actually turn out to be left-handed? It's a huge population.
I know it's pretty convenient for something that never gets brought up again.
There's all those scenes where like Homer runs into someone and sees that they're complaining about, you know, the fact that, oh, stupid right-handed whatever, and you know he never quite like is able to tell them about the store, right? He's about to do it and something interrupts him, or he decides not to do it just because he's like a dick. But yeah, a lot of people are left-handed in Springfield. So what else can we say about this episode? Let's see.
I like bringing up the history of the show, like when it was happening in time. So October 3rd, 1991. So right around this time is when the Soviet Union was dissolving. Literally,
well, yes,
2 weeks before
true.
this.
That's a good point. That's something that would have been, you know, dinner table conversations going on at that time. And you're right, it was happening right around this time because before the end of 1990, before the end of the year, the Soviet Union had dissolved. Like that I remember clearly.
Yeah.
I remember that very clearly, and it was what everybody's talking about. And I especially remember that for New Year's Eve for 92, right? It was the New Year's Eve that went from 91 to 92. I watched the New Year's Eve special that I think aired on Fox, the one that aired on Fox, which was hosted by Penn and Teller. And it had a bunch of, you know, things. Guns N' Roses did a performance, and Sam Kinison did a set, right? And so when Sam Kinison did his set, which of course was, you know, it was clean for network TV, but at one point he did this whole bit about the fact that there's no more Russia. There's no more Russia. You know, like the way he said it in his set, right? And I'm going like, no, there's no more Soviet Union, but Russia still exists. The country itself still exists. Like get it right, Sam Kinison.
You know what's even crazier?
What?
Since this aired on a Thursday, that Tuesday, so the same week on that Tuesday, Yugoslavia disbanded, was dissolved.
Okay, wow. So basically, this aired the week that was going on.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was probably. Did this even get good ratings?
It was number one show that week on Fox.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it was. This was probably back when. Yeah, this is back when like The Simpsons was going to consistently be the number one show on Fox for the week that it aired. So, so I think that much is certain. But yeah, that is wild, man. That was happening at that time. The fact that
feel old.
Well, yeah, to some degree it does. I mean, I'm older than you are by a few years because I was what, 13, 14, something like that. Yeah. But it's crazy. It's really crazy that's what was going on at that time. Yeah.
And here's what was opening in theaters that week. So the week this episode came out, the following you would catch as a new release in the theaters. Ricochet, starring Mike Flynn's favorite director, Russell McKay.
Ricochet, you know, I wanted to see that. I remember like I ended up watching it, you know, months later on video, but I remember really wanting to see that movie. The trailers that were on TV all the time, the TV spots, and there's this electronics store near where I was living at the time in New York, and called J&R Music World, and they had like the video section. You'd go down there, and in that section they sold video games, they sold, you know, different things, and they had TV sets. that would play like because they also had like a video store there where you could rent videos, and so they always had like TV sets that were playing EPKs, and I would go and hang out there all the time, just like because they had like Genesis and Super Nintendo machines set up that you could like play on, right? So I would go there. It was like my arcade, and I would always be seeing like on a constant loop the EPK for Ricochet. So it was a movie I was really like looking forward to, and for whatever reason I didn't go see it when it opened. So that's weird to me, like because that's totally a movie that I would have gone to see. I really wanted to see that movie in theaters. I remember that. It was like the one I was really looking forward to. Just really, I like Denzel Washington, like Ice-T. So it wasn't a particularly eventful week outside of the fact, in terms of I mean, it was a very eventful week, but in terms of like pop culture and movies, no, it was not. In terms of what was actually going on in the world, it was huge. It was a huge week. It was a huge period.
Here's what would already been in theaters during this time: Necessary Roughness.
Ah, yes, Necessary Roughness with Scott Bakula.
Yep.
Yes. I like that movie. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I like that movie.
The
Sinbad's
Fisher King.
in it too, right?
Yep, Sinbad is. The Fisher King was also playing.
It's interesting to think that like The Fisher King was a hit movie.
Yeah, it was one of Gillen's biggest hits.
Yeah, I don't know that a movie like that would be a hit movie today.
No, people are too stupid now.
It's interesting to consider that you have like a movie like that, which is very complex and it's a very quirky, interesting movie, but it is, by Terry Gilliam standards, it's an extremely mainstream film. It's interesting to me that we don't really get movies like that to be hits. It's just tentpoles now, or a movie like that would end up on Netflix today, right? It would just end up on Netflix or Amazon or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at all these movies that would open around then. So all that would have been playing like first run theaters. My ass would have been stuck in a dollar theater watching Doc Hollywood for the third time because I had family members who thought they're pissing everywhere. Michael J. Fox is why is he shaking? Don't pay attention to that. He's pissing everywhere.
That's a little that right. It was on the set of Doc Hollywood that Michael J. Fox first noticed his condition, correct? But it's not noticeable in the movie, is it? I mean, it's not like.
No, that's the joke. The noticeable thing is that I think it was like a PG or PG-13 movie, and there's a boo. Well, it's not total boo, but it's probably the last PG-13 movie with like nudity in it.
Yeah, I mean, because there was a movie I saw. Well, it wouldn't be that recently now. It would have been maybe about a year or two ago that I revisited, right? And it's from the '80s, The Bride, right? The Bride with Sting.
Oh yeah, '85. Jennifer Beals, Sting.
Yeah, and you've got and that movie's rated PG. Okay, that movie's rated PG. I think it's PG. It's probably PG-13. Yeah. But it's got full frontal nudity for Jennifer Beals. It's got like graphic impalement. When God, what's the actor's name? David Rappaport.
There you go.
Yeah, when he gets like thrown against something, he gets impaled, and like it's graphic and Sting, when he takes a dive off the tower at the end of the thing and like plummets to his death and it's like all bloody and I'm going like this movie was rated. This is R-rated violence in a PG-13 movie, and it makes you wonder like how they used to like balance that out. Who made these decisions? Because you look at movies that were rated PG-13, and around the same period, other movies that were rated R, and you kind of like Darkman. Okay, Darkman is an R-rated movie.
Yeah.
But the violence in Darkman is not all that. It's not that much more graphic than the violence in Batman.
No.
I mean, it really isn't. But Batman gets a PG-13 and Darkman gets an R, and so you wonder what happens there, like why that happens. You agree with me, right? That like the actual violence that we see in Darkman is not, I don't recall it being particularly. It's not that much more graphic than the violence in a PG-13 movie from the same period.
No, it's how you show it and like how it hits and how it feels.
Yeah, I guess. I do think that these things about ratings are arbitrary, though. I think that like they're arbitrary decisions made by the MPAA and whatever else, right? Because it really, and I think it continues to go on today. Like I don't know, it's a different. It's not the MPAA anymore, right? It's just the MPA now.
I hate that shit. Oh.
Which I don't. I mean, I don't even know what the difference is, but like, but I do know that it's
It's the
now just
Motion Picture
MPAA.
Association, because saying the Motion Picture Association of America does not sound internationally friendly. I'm
Oh,
like,
I
no,
see.
because they have their own rating boards, idiot.
What any of this has to do with The Simpsons, I don't know, but we really went off on a lot of tangents. So, what's our final word on when Flanders failed?
It's the last gasp of an older style of writing that was on its way out. And this is literally this where you could see the need for a sea change in the writing team.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, I think that again, this is we're early in season three. It's still sort of getting there. The episode in and of itself is entertaining and fun to watch. There's good gags in it. It builds to its maudlin ending. You know, if you allow yourself to get sucked in, it will work on that level. But we're still not looking at a classic episode here. We're still not looking at anything particularly groundbreaking or transcendent, or even that classic. Like I didn't think this episode doesn't show up on any top 10 lists, does it? I mean, it's not.
There's a few here and there. Most of the people give the credit this season to Mr. Plow, which I think is another lame episode. But it's also John Vitti, same guy who wrote Mr. Plow. That's another episode where I don't understand the fandom for it. It's okay. No, season 4. So it was his last episode in season 4.
Mr. Plow has a lot of funny gags. Maybe that's why, you know, and it's got Linda Ronstadt or whatever. Like it has funny gags, and that might be why. But when ranking, it's funny because when I watch the episodes, like I go through them, like I look them up on Wikipedia and just sort of go through a little bit of like just reception and whatever, just to see sort of what the reactions were. And it's funny because like it's like every other episode, at least so far, right? In the first handful of seasons, it's like almost every other episode will say there, Bill Oakley or whatever. When the show went to Disney Plus, Bill Oakley recommended this episode as one of the ones to watch. And I'm going like, that's every other fucking episode. I mean,
Yeah.
Bill Oakley, why don't you just say, yeah, watch the first 10 seasons. Just say that like up front, and then that's it. Okay, so we're still sort of in the last gasp. And when you told me that this is a holdover from season 2, then it sort of clicked for me. I said, yeah, it feels like a season 2 episode. It feels, and I think it's weird they threw it in there. I mean, even the Michael Jackson episode was technically a season 2 episode. It was produced during the season 2 production run.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I'm guessing the first handful of episodes in season 3 are technically season 2 episodes.
The worm has turned, is it not, my tin-plated friend? Look at you, you who were once so proud. Feel the wrath of the left hand of Burns. Huzzah for the shopkeep!
Homer, affordable tract housing made us neighbors, but you made us friends.
To Ned Flanders, the richest left-handed man in town.
So that's it for this week's installment of the Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, consider showing your support. It's really very simple. Give us a like or a favorable rating. This podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, and other podcasting platforms. So adding a brief review, if possible, might actually help boost the podcast's profile. And if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends on social media. Speaking of social media, you can follow the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook or subscribe to it on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet, and feel free to find me and follow me on Letterboxd, where I frequently post film reviews you may or may not agree with. Also, don't forget to seek out AndersonVision.com for all your pop culture news, reviews, and other cool stuff. I'll be providing a link to Troy's website in the episode description. I'm Erix Antoine. I'll be back next week when Jason Pollock and I will be discussing Bart the Murderer, in which Bart falls in with Fat Tony and the rest of Springfield's Italian mafia community, and Principal Skinner mysteriously disappears. Season 3 at last starts springing to life, and I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stay safe out there. See you next week.
And now, Now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow.
Shh.